This conference will now be recorded.
All right, welcome again. My name is Rod Soto, and today I'm here with Jonathan Respeto, and we're going to have our very own Michael Brown. He is an expert in policy. If you want to know anything about any type of policy, even if they have it in a draft, Michael is your guy. Like Michael, you should call this guy if you have audits, all kinds of questions about policies. Michael could probably teach an entire year of classes about policies. This dude is amazing. He always helps us. He's been in all our conferences. He's still with us, and for that, I'm thankful, Michael. And today, he's going to talk about something that I get, for example, approached many times. People comes to me saying, SOC2, can you help me with this? There is a lot of confusion on this, and this is why this is a great presentation, because for some reason people confuse SOC2 with security operations. Sometimes I have placed things like, oh no, I know SOC, and then people will come and tell me things like, how do you know SOC? You're not an accountant, for example. That was something that I was told. I knew that you needed some sort of a CPA knowledge. Today we're going to find out about it, because what happens is many times people think that this is something that you can do with, I guess, many security professionals. The answer is no. You had to do this with very specific companies that have very specific skilled people. And I am personally looking forward to see this presentation today, because I admitted I don't know much about SOC 2 stuff. So I'm gonna make you a presenter, Michael. Thank you very much, and take it away.
Okay. Let me see. Yeah.
And questions, please, for the end.
Okay. Are you guys able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So as I have to do, this presentation on SOC 2 reports, I will not claim to be an expert on them. I've had a lot of experience with them and exposure to them. And so because of that, I felt that I could do a good job at this. So, okay. Okay, this is a background on myself. I've been actually in IT for over 20 years, about half that in InfoSec. I actually started out more as a sysadmin, and over the years, I found myself kind of pulled into what I would say more compliance type work, assessments and governance risks and compliance and so forth. Last 7 years, I worked as a consultant, helping a lot of organizations with being assessed for HIPAA compliance, helping organizations with SOC 2, with preparing to be certified for ISO 27001, being certified for high trust and things like that. Also doing some PCI work. I've moved on. I'm now a security and compliance manager with a company. I'm hopefully helping them to get a SOC 2, which I've actually done with some of my clients. Active with various organizations here in the area, some local chapters of several national organizations. So I'm going to give some background, some terminology. That way, when you hear some of these things regarding SOC 2, at least you'll be a little bit more familiar. Talk a little bit about what's in a SOC 2 report. Talk a little bit about why you would use SOC 2 as a tool for vendor management, and then probably more important for hopefully some of you guys there is, what if you are faced with your company needing to get themselves a SOC 2, and some of the things that I've done in helping my clients get ready for that. And then I always try to give resources with all my presentations to kind of point you guys, everyone in the right direction for further information beyond what I'm able to cover here. So I thought also I'd touch on my SOC 2 background. So I've actually helped several clients with SOC 2 assessments. Most particularly, I worked with 2 clients where I was their what's referred to as a virtual CISO or fractional CISO to help them get SOC 2 Type 2 reports. One was a kind of a strange retail conglomerate company. I came on board, worked with them for a couple of years, developed and implemented policies and controls, making sure the evidence was being gathered to show this. I also wound up, as part of that, helping them with, security awareness training for their employees, helping out with incident response testing and DR testing, making sure that they did pen tests by other people. I put together what's called a system description, which is an important part for the report. I will touch a little bit more on what the heck that is. And then when the SOC2 assessment came in, I was kind of like the center point for that in terms of lining up who the assessors need to talk to, working directly with the assessors, answering their questions, kind of like in the middle of all of that, which was quite a bit of work. And of course, we were successful in getting a good SOC2 Type 2 report at the end of that. The other company I worked with was a much smaller company dealing with what you would call incentive programs. If you're not aware, this is where, like, various companies will say, like, hey, if you do these things, I see a lot with some of the healthcare companies, health insurance companies, they'll say, like, hey, if you do these sort of things, we'll give you a gift card. So this is something that this company would do. So I came in, looked at their policies and controls. This company was different. They actually had a decent set of policies. They had pretty good controls already in place. I kind of looked over them, saw some gaps. We filled those gaps. We first had, they first went through and did a SOC2 Type 1 engagement that was successful. And then for a 12-month period, we made sure that, hey, we had evidence of the controls in place. They came back for the SOC2 Type 2. It was a pretty, easy engagement because they were, had things pretty well in hand and got their SOC2 Type 2 successfully. Both these things were done actually last year. So one thing first part of this, I'm touching on various different things. And I was trying to do this in kind of a logical manner, but sometimes some of the stuff, it was hard for me to, like, how would I put this in a logical manner? So one thing I need to make clear about is there's a difference between, and I'm not sure what we should call it, assessing. There's also, you call it certifying and whatnot, versus assisting. And this is the thing, when you have different organizations that come in and certify a company or assess a company, to give them like a certification for ISO 27001, or the CPA firm that comes in and does the SOC2 report. If you're familiar with the new Department of Defense's CMMC scheme, getting certified in that, getting certified in high trust, those companies that come in and do that, they cannot help that company they're assessing get ready. They can't come along and say, like, oh, your policies aren't well. Here's some policies that you can use and this sort of stuff. They have to kind of separate that out. Even CMMC is very clear on that. They have two different kind of people. They have one that can come in and do the prep work, and they even have a training scheme for those people, and they have a training scheme and certifying scheme for people who want to come to and certify. And you can be both, but you can't do both with the same company. So if your organization, so if a company comes in and helps a company prepare, they cannot be the ones doing the assessment or certification. So in some cases, you'll have companies that kind of just focus just on the certifying assessment type stuff, and they will leave the prep work assistant type stuff to other companies. So sometimes they'll team up with another company. So the company I was with, we were more the helping out versus the assessing. And it was actually kind of funny in that all of our clients that were getting assessed for SOC 2 all wound up working with the same, audit firm, accounting firm. So we were like doing all this assistance, and it was all the same audit firm. So in some cases, we were kind of working, kind of with the same people, but we did realize that we had that separation between us. So that's what kind of Rod mentioned, was that with a SOC 2 report, it can only come from an accounting firm. And I've never worked with an accounting firm, so I could never have been someone who's actually assessing a company to get a SOC 2, but I can go and help them get ready, which is what I was doing. So what is a SOC 2 report? It's actually one of several reports. I'm going to talk about what those different ones are, done by accounting firms. And these are important because the SOC 2 report is a report on the controls of a company, which they then use to provide to either potential clients or current clients to say like, hey, we're providing services to you. Here's this report on those services so that you can trust that they are working and you can rely upon us and so forth. So it's a way for clients, potential clients, to say like, yeah, we want to do business with this company because they can provide us with this third-party assessment of their services, and we can look at it and like know that, oh yeah, everything is working good and so forth, and we can trust them, and we don't have to spend all our time assessing that company. We get this good report. And honestly, this has become more and more important. And like I said, a lot of companies were coming to us for help, because they need to get assessed, because their clients are coming to them and saying like, well, we're only gonna do business with you if you get a SOC 2 report or some of the other reports that are out there, like I said, high trust in healthcare, ISO 27001. And honestly, I don't see that going away. I see it actually increasing. So again, what is SOC? SOC, we oftentimes hear SOC, we think of Security Operations Center. That's not what we're talking about. Or if you're more of a techie person, you might have heard the term system on a chip, like the special, the chips in your smartphones and whatnot. That's not what we're talking about. The term SOC used to mean Service Organization Controls, and now it's been renamed as System and Organization Controls. So, and sometimes when people say SOC, I had to think, are you talking about a Security Operations Center, or are you talking about a SOC report? So that's sort of the things. So what do we mean by a service organization? And this is actually a quote from the documents. It's an organization providing services to what they call a user entity. That's basically another client or company, for which these services are likely to be relevant to those companies because it has an impact on finances and so forth. In terms of a SOC 2, this would be things like they're providing financial services as billing and processing and payload. Like, we're a small company, and instead of us hiring an accountant to do this sort of stuff, oh, we'll just use this application from ADP or someone else. Okay, great. If we're relying upon that, let's get a report to know that's going to be going good. And more of the technical stuff, we'll see, people who are doing SaaS services, cloud computing, virtualization. I'm instead of me building a data center, I'm going to go and house my servers in Rackspace or Terramark or whatever. I want to know that those systems will be protected and so forth. I'm relying upon another third party for web hosting, cloud computing. So whether I'm using AWS or Azure or Google Cloud or what have you, I want to know that that's going to be taken care of. And if you go to these different companies, they will actually have on their website, yes, we have all these different reports and certifications and so forth. You go to AWS, they have like a compliance page where you can see a list of all the different certifications and attestations and whatnot. They've got a SOC 1, 2, and 3 report, and they're ISO 27001 certified, and they're high trust, and they're PCI, and yada yada yada. These companies get these things because they know it's a good selling point. That way they have it. You can then use a potential client can trust that things are good because they've spent the time and money to get these reports, and you can go and check them out. So I mentioned that with there is more than one SOC report, and so AICPA, that's American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, they're the ones that have this, and they now call it their suite of services. And at this point, there's actually 5 different reports. There's SOC 1, 2, and 3. SOC 1 is about financial reporting. So I don't have much experience with that because I really don't get into the financial side of things. SOC 2 is what we're talking about here, and that's one I have experience with. This is what they get in what they call trust services controls, which is security, availability, process integrity, confidentiality, or privacy. And SOC 1 and 2 have what's called a type 1 report and a type 2 report. I'll talk about that a little bit more shortly. There's also a SOC 3, which is basically SOC 1 and 2 have a lot of very sensitive information. So because of that, you can't get a SOC 1 or 2 report unless you sign an NDA. So if you go to a company that has these, they will say on the website they have them, but they're not going to put them there. If you want them, you'll have to contact them directly and maybe agree to or sign off on an NDA. Whereas the SOC 3 is more general use, so they could actually put that on a website. I know for myself, I actually got AWS's SOC 2 report because I used to have a free AWS account, so I had kind of signed off on things, and I can actually go and access it, and I had to then kind of sign off. I got on the NDA and get their SOC 2 report. But 1 and 2 are under NDAs, so that's why they're kind of restricted. There's also SOC 2 for cybersecurity. That's kind of a new one, and I've never seen one of these yet, not had anyone ask for them. Though I am familiar with it, I've looked at it, I've gotten the book on it, and actually did a presentation on it, but don't know if people are doing it. And the newest one is this new one for vendor supply chain, which gets into, production, manufacturing, and distribution. So these are for, SOC 2 is good for a company kind of providing services that get into these, security and whatnot, whereas the vendor management, this is more for a company that's doing, you're building something, you're producing something in the supply chain, and you want to be able to show that, hey, you got controls about that. I don't know much more about that. That's one's fairly recent. I know that up until very recently, it was always coming soon. So I mentioned the type 1 and type 2, and one thing I should mention, I've seen a lot of time people will write these as Roman numerals. So sometimes I'll see type 2 was as a type Roman numeral 2, which is really not correct, but I see that a lot. A type 1 is basically a report on, it's a point in time. They come in, take a look at the controls, give you a report, but there's no guarantee that those controls have been in place for a period of time. So, so it's like, well, maybe they put them in place 2 days ago. You don't know because there's no, period of time. Type 2 is more valuable. It's over a period of time. So not only do they look at the controls, but they look at evidence going back, a previous period of time. Now, I always was told it was 9 to 12 months. Some of the things I'm hearing is that it could be as short as 3 months, which honestly, I don't feel there's much value, because what most companies want is they want a type 2 report that's from the past 12 months. So like 3 months is like, that's not too good unless you're then gonna, do another report very quickly for a 12-month period. And every time you do have someone come in and do a SOC 2 report, that's time and money. So most times it's 12 months, and usually once a company starts getting a type 2 report, it's going to become an annual thing. You did it last year, in August, hey, they're going to come by again in preparation for giving you a new report for August of this year, and so forth. So it becomes a cycle of it. And that's also important, because like if someone gives you a type, SOC 2 report, and it's like older than 12 months old, you're like, where's the newest one? Are you in the process? Let me get can we get what's called a bridge letter? Because, that's kind of the expectation. And I'll talk a little bit more about, what we mean, what they're looking for in terms of evidence and so forth. So as I said, these are the 5 trust, criteria: security, availability, processing, integrity, confidentiality, and privacy. Now, one thing interesting about these 5 is you don't have to do all 5. My understanding was always that kind of like the default 3 was you want to do security, availability, and confidentiality. If you need to, typically because your clients are demanding it, you might do process integrity, maybe privacy. One of my clients, unfortunately, they were like basically told, we want all 5, and the assessor was even saying, because they were being pretty decent about it. They're like, what criteria do you need? Because, if we can keep it to a minimum, we can keep your costs low, which is decent than to have that, attitude. And they were forced to do all 5. Security, as I understand, you must do security. There's no way out of it. All the other 4 is optional. But my thinking has always been security, availability, confidentiality, kind of the basic ones. Processing integrity may not really apply for some companies. Privacy, same thing. So if you don't need to, don't do it. In addition, when you look at the list of the controls, there's actually additional controls in the 4 that again are optional. That's something that people sometimes don't realize when they get the list of the trust, like the controls. As I look at it, and there's like over 100, like, oh God, we got to do all of these. I'm like, no, you don't. You can actually, the assessors will work with you and say, okay, these are what's important, what are appropriate. These aren't. These don't really apply to you. And so forth. And so you wind up doing like a more of a subset of them. I think most of us know what we mean by security. Availability means, hey, the systems are available. Confidentiality, you're protecting confidential data. Privacy, it's optional because not everyone will collect, personal information from people. And processing integrity, if you're not really processing information, if you're just kind of like, taking it and using it, not making changes to it, then it's not really applicable. So what are these reports based upon? And I brought this because I hear these terms as well. They're based upon a series of accounting standards. So when I first started getting exposed to this, I always heard SAS 70. And that was, statement on auditing standards. So it was SAS 70 was the standard for a SOC 2 report for many, many years. I know when I started getting in that, I heard that all the time, SAS 70, SAS 70. That was replaced by SSAE 16, to see statement on standards of attestation examinations. Really, really fun term, which went into effect in like 2010, 2011. However, it's been replaced, as you see, by SSAE 18 as of 2017, which is, almost 4 years ago. Yet I find it funny as I still see people making reference to SSAE 16, and it's like, come on, that was 4 freaking years ago. Get up with the times. Sort of like someone still talking about Windows 95 when it's like, we're on Windows 10 now. I think you need to get up to date. And if you're really a glutton for punishment, you can actually get these documents and read them. They are really boring. So you have been. I've mentioned controls several times, and I just want to make sure people understand what the heck I mean by controls, because unfortunately sometimes people don't. Basically they're activities performed by a person or a system designed to ensure that certain objectives are being met.
Get it. Hello.
Someone needs to go on mute. So this term comes from the idea of internal controls for businesses. But of course we in InfoSec are really fall under IT. So we really talk about IT controls for ourselves. And there's actually a term called IT general controls, ITGC, and IT application controls. You can actually, if you want to know more about this, there's actually a decent Wikipedia article on it. And ITGC include topics such as change management, source code version control, stuff, software development life cycle, incident management, disaster recovery, backups, and things like that. Things that we as IT and InfoSec people do deal with. That's actually part of IT general controls. And what some people don't understand, because I actually had a kind of annoying conversation with someone once where they asked me, kind of challenged me, did I understand what controls were? And I said, sure I do. I worked with these policies and procedures, and I got a really negative response from this person because this person did not understand that yes, policies and procedures are in fact controls. This person thought that they're only technical controls or controls, and that's just not true. They start off as policies and procedures. You hope that they are then implemented in technology. So for instance, if you have password settings, you first have a password policy that sets down that, hey, our password must be minimum 8 characters, mixture upper and lower case, you need to change it every 90 days, all that sort of jive. You define that in a password policy. That is a control. It's what an administrative control. And then hopefully, because you have that now administrative control, you then take that and you implement it into technology, into your password system. That way, when you go to create a new password, that you pick something that's in line with policy because the technology is enforcing it. But yes, policies are controls. Ideally, we want technical controls to put in place, but that's how it works. Again, that's what I'm talking about here about password policy. We also talk about, for IT general control frameworks, there's actually two main ones. There's COBIT from ISACA, and the other one is from COSO, their internal control framework, and this is what SOC2 is based upon. There are other control frameworks out, for information security. When we talk about control frameworks, it's things such as 27002 and NIST SP 853 and the CIS control, what used to be called the critical security controls, and the stuff within the NIST cybersecurity framework. Those are all security controls. These are things that hopefully everyone has some working familiarity with. I wanted to touch a little bit on COSO only because, again, if you get into SOC2, you'll hear it. You'll hear it on occasion. In fact, one of my when I was working with one of my clients, the assessor kept saying, COSO standards, and he kept mentioning COSO, and the guy, the CIO who I was working with, reached out to me, he's like, what the heck is he talking about with COSO? he had no idea what it was because he was a technical person, and I had to say, that's just where the controls come from. So COSO it stands for Committee of the Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission. It was actually when they had the Enron scandal with accounting and whatnot. A group of 5 organizations that I listed here, things like AICPA and other, as you can see, kind of accounting and professional organizations and IT audit and whatnot, came together, as a committee, and they set down some standards on internal control, risk management, and so forth, to hopefully prevent in the future, accounting fraud and so forth. You might see these two things floating around. They're referred to as the COSO cube of how they kind of put these things together. They have what they call an enterprise risk management framework and an internal controls framework that was put out. I have not seen these documents. I've kind of thought about getting it just for the heck of getting it and looking at it, but a lot of this sort of stuff, even with the SOC 2 stuff, is like really, really, really dry reading and kind of boring. But that's where it comes from, and that's about as much as I'm going to talk about when it comes to COSO. You can go to the website and you can bore yourself to death if you want to go and take a look at it. But having said that, as I said, the trust security criteria of SOC 2 is based upon these, what they call COSO principles. There's 17 of them organized into these different groups. And this is kind of like the high level grouping of the controls. And some of the stuff at the top, like control environment and communication information and risk assessment, these are more of the upper management type stuff, where in some cases I don't even necessarily have a good visibility because, I'm more at, the InfoSec IT level, and I don't know what the heck's going on in, like, say, the senior leadership team and the board and this sort of stuff. It's down in these other ones here where we get into logical and physical access controls and system operations and change management. This is more where it gets into the more IT type stuff that I'm used to. I'm sure most of you guys are used to. This gets into like, hey, are you doing backups? Do you have antivirus in place? Do you have, are you managing account creation and deletion and, doing pin tests and, assessing controls and patching systems and all that sort of stuff. That's more in these lower areas and whatnot that, the SOC 2 gets into, that I think for most of us, we would be, with. But the thing is that people don't realize is that it also gets into the upper things, into like that, what the management team is doing. Are they, taking a look at, what's going on in the organization and setting down standards and, what we refer to as the tone from the top, that they're set and then okay. I also wanted to touch upon U.S. versus international. The thing is that these SOC reports are pretty much American and American focus, and they have little or no value outside the U.S. And this is something I've actually seen with some clients where some will go for a SOC 2 report and some will go for certification in ISO 27001, which is probably kind of the closest sort of an international, comparison. Some might do both, but so if you're working here if your company is here in the U.S. and you only deal with companies in the U.S., then a SOC 2 is probably more valuable, than ISO 27001. Whereas if you're more of an international company doing business overseas, then 27001 may be more of value, and sometimes people get both. So I've seen that as well. It just depends. And there actually is a lot of overlap between the two. I think even AICPA actually has some crosswalks between SOC 2 and other frameworks, including 27001. So if you're really curious, you can go check it out. So what is actually in a SOC 2 report? And I've actually seen several, and I wanted to show it to you guys, but unfortunately I said, because of the fact that you had to kind of sign off on an NDA and whatnot, and figured this is probably a kind of recorded session, I didn't want to risk anything. So this is kind of a high level overview of kind of what you will see. So there'll be like a letter from the assessor company, there'll be a letter from the company itself. Honestly, these are kind of like boilerplate sections. I kind of skip over them. I want to get, if I'm looking at a report myself, I want to get into the meat of it. So the next part is the system description, which, believe it or not, this is actually written by the company itself, and then it gets to the format of the assessor. So with one of my clients, I was actually the one that actually wrote the system description. So the system description talks about the company, itself, what services it provides, and of course, again, it's what this report is on, and I'll talk a little bit more what I mean by that shortly. What third parties they rely upon, because that's something you might not think about it, but many companies, may be providing a services to a client that they themselves rely upon other third parties for their, for what they're doing. So if you think about it, like if I'm, a SaaS vendor selling my SaaS, software services to clients, my system might not be in my, back office. It may be at a data center or in the cloud. Well, that's a third party that I'm relying upon for the service that I'm providing to my clients. And so, I need to go their SOC 2 reports and take a look at it and show that I've done so, and that's part of it. Then it goes into the control assessment, on all the controls that they're assessed against. What was the outcome? Were they tested or not tested? And that's not a negative thing. There are in some cases where they actually can't test something. And let me give you a couple of actual examples. I mentioned one of the clients I worked with was a very small company. They were about 15 people, and one of the things that they get tested on is how you handle your onboarding of employees and your offboarding of employees. So this company is like 15 people, and they have not had anyone come on board or leave during that assessment period. So since no one has come on board and no one has left, how then could you test your processes for bringing someone on board or having them leave? You can't, because there's nothing to test. So it's not a negative. You actually can't test it. Or even like, if you have a process that you do for handling of a security incident and you haven't had a security incident, you can't really test per se, that, you can do like a tabletop exercise, but that's not quite the same thing. There's also, of course, the outcome of the test, which is, of course, that it was all good and it was, no exceptions found. That's actually usually what they say if it went well. Or if there was a problem, then they found exceptions, which you don't really want because that's not good. And so if that's the case, then this last section is what you will see, where management of that company then has to respond to why they failed these tests. And actually one SOC 2 report I was reviewing recently, that was the case. I'm not going to give you too much details, but I think basically what it was due to the pandemic, they decided to like be a little more looser with some of their controls. So then they got kind of like spanked in the report because of that, and then they had to kind of like say, well, we loosened the controls during the pandemic, and that was a mistake. We won't do it again, type thing. So you as a company, you want to have a report that comes out with no exceptions. That's what you want. And thankfully, the two companies I work with, no exceptions. So one big part that SOC 2 is used for is part of vendor management. If you're a company and you want to assess the vendors that you rely upon to run your business, like I said, and a lot of companies, that's just the way it is now, is they rely upon third parties to be able to do what they do. Like I said, a lot of companies are they put their computers either in the cloud or in data centers from third parties. They want to make sure those are managed. They may be relying upon, like ADP and other companies to provide them with like accounting and payroll services and this sort of stuff. So they want to make sure, hey, that's all copacetic. So because of that, how do you then, you should do due diligence and be assessing these different vendors. And, especially if you're providing them your data, you want to make sure that data is secure and not gotten out. And now in the healthcare industry, we call this a business associate, and that's very, very critical. But outside that, you want to be managing those vendors and know that they're doing things right. So how do you do it? And either you can make it a lot of work for yourselves, or you can try to make things easier. And one, you can do like sending them a questionnaire that they then have to answer to say like, do you have policies? Are you doing, do you have antivirus in place? Do you have a disaster recovery plan in place? Have you tested it? Have you have incident response? Blah, 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 blah. There's actually a company called Shared Assessments that actually will sell you a very good questionnaire for that very purpose to make it easier. Or you can save yourself a lot of grief by saying, hey, either fill out this really tiresome questionnaire or give us your SOC2 report or some similar reports like that, and then we'll kind of go away. So like I said, doing your own questionnaire, even if you're doing like even if you're doing like a shared assessment type thing, you still have to look over it. Asking for that third-party report just makes things a lot easier. Of course, the caveat is you do have to freaking look over it. Like I said, I saw one SOC2 report that I think was over 200 pages, and there's a lot of details in it. You got to kind of go through that, but having that, kind of makes it easier in terms of vendor management. But the thing is that there's going to be new SOC2 report every year, so you need to be on top of it, ask for the new one, and so forth. And so because of all this vendor management, this is what's driving, the need for these companies to say like, hey, we're working with you, either give us a SOC 2 report or we're not going to do business with you. The money we're being at least going to be reasonable. They're like saying like, okay, we know it's going to take you some time and effort, so we'll give you 2 years to get the SOC 2 report. Otherwise, we're going to stop doing business with you. So the next thing is that that's what you're being faced. Your company is being told they have to get a SOC 2 report, and you may or may not get pulled into it. Again, why are they pursuing it? Ideally, it's done because their clients are asking for it, and because I've actually dealt with all these questionnaires, I see that a lot. I see like, we want a SOC 2 type 2 report, or we want 27001 certification or 2 or 3 others, and so forth. It's important, of course, that you have that executive support, because this is going to take time and money. If I know that certainly, if I'm focused on getting SOC 2 for the company I'm working for, I'm going to be spending a lot of my time. My time is money. I'm going to have to be going to a lot of other people and say, okay, I need your help on this, and we need to fix this and this sort of stuff. Hopefully management understands that how much time it's take. It's not like you're going to knock this out in a weekend or a couple of weeks. And this is going to be an ongoing cost. This means that someone will need to be gathering evidence all year long in preparation for an annual assessment, and the auditors are going to come back, every year and spend, several days, gathering evidence, talking to people, and this sort of stuff, and again, that's going to be not only you're paying them that money to do that, you're going to have to deal with someone running around and gathering all that information and talking with them and so on and so forth. So people need to understand that that's how it is. So setting things up for success, like I said, what is your time frame? Give yourself at least 2 years as a worst case. It can be less. Like I said, the smaller client I was working with, I would say that it took, for us, it was, to go and get them from nothing to get them the SOC 2 Type 2 was basically a year and a half. I came in, helped them out. We did the SOC 2 Type 1 in like August of 2019, with the target of them coming back in, again to do the Type 2 with a August 2020. Of course, that meant that they were actually here a little bit earlier to kind of do the evidence gathering and so forth. So start to finish, about a year and a half. So that's how it is. Again, you have to get that management backing. Hopefully, they're the ones driving it, but like I said, you need it for time and money. What is the scope of the assessment? This is something also important to think about is, are you doing your entire company or just a subset? Because this will affect your costs and your effort. Like I said, the two examples that I worked with, in one case, it was the entire company, because the entire company was doing, the incentive programs. So everyone was involved in that. That was the service they were selling. So it had to be the whole company. That's how it is. With the retail entity that I was working with, instead what they did was they instead of being the entire company, which was been a nightmare. Thank God they didn't do it, because I probably would have gone insane. They actually shrunk the scope very small to just being the two entities that were providing a software as a service, and that was it. They left all the rest of the entity out. That, in my mind, made it much more doable. Also reduced their cost very much. So that's something also, and that's something that had to be thought about. If you have like maybe an international company, and maybe the SOC 2 report is only on your U.S. business and not the stuff overseas, that could be done. Or if it's just you have a large entity doing all kind of different things, but your services to clients, it's more appropriate for SOC 2, maybe just a small subset. Great, just do the SOC 2 report on that. So, and even if you look at things like with AWS or maybe with Microsoft, they actually have multiple SOC 2 reports, because it's on each one on just as a small subset service. Because again, Microsoft is a huge company. They're not doing a SOC 2 report on the entire Microsoft company. It's only on, our Azure services or our Office 365. That's it. Because you got to think about it, like Microsoft is also like Xbox and things like that. So they're not going to include their Xbox business into a SOC 2 report. That makes no sense. So that makes it more easily done. Another thing here, what I talk about is like, consider having a consulting company come in to assist. The company I work with, this is what we did for clients. We came in and helped them out. We would do things like we would look at we would assess their readiness. We'd look at like what controls were in place, what policies were in place, what need to be improved, help them do that. Because sometimes people in the company were just, maybe they were busy with other things, or just didn't have that knowledge or expertise. And so having that outside expertise coming in and helping them out, could really assist them. And even some other clients we were helping with, maybe we came in and just helped them with the information gathering for the assessment itself, is some of the things that we did to kind of help them out. I didn't determine scope. I talked about the scope. That's a very important thing. Another thing I mentioned earlier is about those 5 trust services. Do you do all 5 or just a subset? That also will help you with costs. I mean, I think personally, in my view, the idea should be the minimum is doing the security, availability, confidentiality, and if you can, leave out processing integrity and privacy. But that can be determined by your clients. That was one thing that I had to do with my current company, was take a look at some of these questionnaires from our different clients to see, like, what do they say about the SOC 2 in terms of like what controls do they have to include. And I only saw mention for a couple. A couple mentioned security. One also mentioned confidentiality. That was it. So that works. Another thing, this is what I mentioned earlier, is that do you go for the type 1 report this year and then work your way up to doing the type 2? That could be good if you aren't comfortable that you actually have a year's worth of evidence already in place, because you don't want to be going and jumping in to do a type 2 report and find out that, oh, you're missing evidence and now you're going to have failures in that report. Or do you feel that you do have that year's worth of evidence that you can jump in and do the type 2? Like I said, with the two companies I worked with, one did the type 2 immediately. I was a little bit scared about that, but it was successful. The other one, we did the type 1 and then the type 2. That's, I was kind of told that's not the normal thing to do, and that worked as well. Preparing for the assessment, like I said, you want to assess those controls. What I typically did was I had a spreadsheet that I had obtained. You can get these, look them on the internet. Actually, AICPA has them, that basically listed all of the controls. And then I went through and said, okay, do we have documentation for these? Let me actually write down the policies that exist, or if we don't, I need to go make sure that we have that in place. Is there evidence in place? And if so, do we have a year's worth of it? I should have added this here as well. Is what I would also recommend doing is going and noting who should be kind of the subject matter expert for that control or whatnot, because when the assessors come in, those are the people that you're going to probably have interviewed on for that. So I would went through and said, okay, these are more HR type stuff, so it's going to be kind of the HR people, and I actually was able to get the right people's names and put them there, and like, oh, here's the more IT control. So like these one here, I think it'd be this guy here who is doing this area, so that he'll take care of that. And these controls, that's gonna be this other person here. So I really kind of identify who the person I would go to kind of like validate that we have evidence, who would be the ones that be interviewed. So I'd mentioned about evidence. So these, unfortunately, I'm not seeing like a listing that says like, okay, for this control, they want to see these things. I really wish that I don't know if that exists or if it's just not available. So what are they looking for when they talk about evidence? Obviously, they're going to look for written policies and procedures. That's a given. Other evidence would be like reports, like if you're doing a pen test report, vulnerability scan report, if you conduct a disaster recovery or incident response tabletop exercise, they should have a report generated from that that said this was the results. Any output from any systems like log files, virus scanners, backup systems, and so forth that show that these things are happening, and doing properly. It could also be things such as if you're doing like training, you want to have it, in an actual system, that evidence of, pay people did training, or you got people signed off on, contracts, and employees sign off on NDAs. You should have some kind of a system that's all kept in, because that's you use that to provide evidence. Configuration settings, like say like the password settings and stuff like that. If there's any screenshots being provided as evidence, you need to include a date and time stamp. I mention that just because sometimes people don't think about it. Other evidence they ask for is things like org charts, job descriptions, and so forth. Sometimes evidence can be kind of weak, and you want to make sure about that. I mean, I'm sorry, someone taking notes in a notepad application, saving it, is weak evidence. You want evidence that can be not questioned for being valid. I mean, you don't want something that some idiot just kind of wrote up that, oh yeah, I did this, on this date, and then I have no way to validate in that. Yeah, did you create that 6 months ago, or did you create that today? Something also they do is they also will sample evidence. That's important because if you're giving a year's worth of evidence, that can be just too much. Just as an example, if you do security awareness training for all the employees, they're not going to say, okay, you have 100 employees, please give me the record for every one of these employees for them going through training. No, they're not going to do that. They're going to do a sampling. They're going to say, give us a list of your employees. Okay, and they'll go through that list and they'll pick out a random sample set, maybe 10 or 15, and they'll come back and say, like, okay, these 10, 15 people, give us evidence that they have gone through training, that they have signed their NDA agreement, that they've signed, that they will abide by company policies, and so on and so forth. And then you need to provide that evidence, and that way, it's not like you giving them 100 copies of things, but you're giving a sample that they have selected from. That's a random sampling. So that's something that they do, that they will do a lot. So it's a lot of stuff, and that's why also I said, if you've got person who has been gathering this stuff over a period of time, then it becomes much more easier when the assessors come in and start asking for you to give them stuff. The assessment, like I said, that's when the assessors, from the accounting firm come in and start doing their work. They of course be asking for evidence. They will, have some kind of a system to make it easy, an FTP site or what have you, to upload all the evidence. They'll be very clear about what they're looking for. They will set up interviews for key personnel, the executives, management, HR, IT people, and so forth. And a lot of it is they're kind of validating what's going on. If if the policy says XYZ, they'll go to the person and say, okay, tell me how you do your job, because they looked at the policy, they want to make sure that what they're being told is, what is matching up. And they'll even go further. We'll actually have the person do things and whatnot and say, like, okay, hold on, let me they'll do screenshots and this sort of stuff. As I said, the system description that I talked about that you put together, this is usually the first year that's done, that is also provided. Like I said, one of the clients, I was one that wrote the system description, because I spent a lot of time understanding the company and so forth. Then I took a template that the assessors had, and I modified that with what I knew of the company. And we did a little bit big one. There was some back and forth between myself, the assessor, some other people in the company to kind of hammer that out, but that's how it came from. Now the thing is with the assessments is that up until COVID, all the interviews were on-site, in-person interviews, and would typically run, depending on the size of the organization, 2 or 3 days, maybe more. At least the ones that I've dealt with, because of the size of the company, I would think probably 2 or 3 days. But for a really big company, I have no idea how long the interviews would take. Now, as I had my 2 clients I worked with were last year, and due to COVID, everything was remote. We did this over like a 2 or 3 year period, doing the interviews spread out over that 2 or 3 year period. Sorry, 2 or 3 week period. So that's a little bit different. I know that's something that AICPA is kind of allowed for, because in the past they expected the assessor to be on site. And that's something also to think about when you talk about cost, is that if you use like a local company to do your assessment, then you don't have to worry about travel costs versus oh, here we are in Miami and I'm going to bring in a company from DC to do my assessment. Oh great, I'm going to have to put them up in a hotel and yada yada yada, and that's going to come out of what you're being charged for the assessment, versus oh yeah, there's some local people and they just come on over and for the day and whatnot. So now after the assessment, the assessors of course will take all the evidence, they'll go through and they'll review it. Someone's come back and say like, okay, I need some more evidence here, or this isn't clear, and this sort of stuff. There might be a little bit back and forth on the evidence. They will then draft up, and the draft report will take usually a couple of weeks or so. They'll draft up, at least the subject I dealt with, there was a couple of weeks. I think again for the bigger companies, it might be longer than that. They will draft up a draft SOC2 report. It'll get sent to key personnel for review. Like I know I got it as I was one reviewing the draft report. I was looking for not just the basic stuff, but just making sure that it was accurate, it looked good. I think with one of the reports, there was a couple of things where they had dinked us on stuff, and I went and kind of went back and said, I don't know if that's correct. You dinked us on this. I don't know if that's true. And we did some back and forth, and we worked it out, and it was it went okay. And so the nice thing is, if there is issues found in the evidence, then of course you can respond to it. And if they can't address it, then unfortunately they'll kind of write up a report that's much more serious, to say like, yes, we didn't do as well, and this is why we're not going to do it again, so on and so forth. So overall, this whole process might take 2 or 3 weeks. That's why if you want the report in, say, in August, they're going to come in like a month or 2 before to start the evidence gathering, the interviews, and developing a report and this sort of stuff, because once August hits, boom, that's kind of the cutoff point. They can't take any evidence after that. Anything that they take has to have been dated before that time. Hence, that's why they have to come in advance of that to do the evidence gathering, interviewing, and this sort of stuff, because they do have to be, that cutoff point and no further. So again, and this is, for me, I had like basically the first time doing it. So, the first time is a lot more work. You had to create that system, that system description. It's the first time being assessed for those controls and so forth. So hopefully, when the second year comes along and the third year comes along, where, if as long as there's no radical changes in the organization and its environment, it's just more of, you gather the evidence, you make sure it's in place. They come by, they take a look at the evidence, everything looks good, boom, you're done. We'll see you next year type thing. And I hate to say it'd be kind of routine, but to a degree it does, but you still have to have that evidence and so forth. Otherwise, there's going to be some problems. Again, once the report is complete, if the company wanted to, they can actually add a logo on the website saying that they have a SOC2 report. Hey, do business with us, we got SOC2. They can then provide that, of course, with an NDA to potential clients or actual clients. As I said, they have to, you need to start preparing for next year. Hopefully, if need be, maybe improve controls, maybe improve evidence. If some of the evidence was kind of weak, but they accepted it, but let's do better. They get more strong. Evidence gathering is going to be a lot of work. It may be you need to create a whole bunch of directories and save stuff, or there's actually these things called GRC tools, which makes it more automatic. And there's people I know that their whole job is basically pulling in stuff and putting it in the GRC tool and making sure the evidence is gathered and so forth. I don't know if I'd want to do that, but that's what some people do. But that's what kind of helps making this as an ongoing activity. There are source resources. I would say the best one is just to go to AICPA. They do have a lot of things that you can download. There is a spreadsheet of the trust security controls. You want to look at for the 2017 version. That was the last update of it. I went and grabbed it. Another one you can get is called DC 200, which is the criteria for system description. These are, you can find these for free and whatnot. If you want to go further, you can get the book, which is the guidebook, which I have a copy. It's clocks in at 460 pages. Real fun reading. But this covers everything. It has in it all the controls, and they talk about it. They include DC 200 and all this sort of stuff. Really boring stuff, I had to admit, but if you want, if you wind up having to do a SOC2 assessment in your company or help them out, you might want to get it. And I'll be honest, the best place to get this is on Amazon. AICPA has a website, but I've actually looking at it, it's actually cheaper and easier just to get it off of Amazon. And if you're really curious, they actually have another book for the SOC2 for cybersecurity. If you're curious about that, and I did do a presentation on that a few years back. But the funny thing was, I actually talked to an assessor about this about a couple of years ago, and she told me that no one had at that point, and not just her company, but ever had gotten a SOC2 for cybersecurity. The title of the book is right there in the slide. Guide SOC2 reporting on an examination of control at a service organization, blah, 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 blah. So search on Amazon for like, guide SOC2, and this should come up. It comes from AICPA, published by Wiley, came out in 2018. It's I think kind of a boring stuff, but but I would say as a starting point, you can get the spreadsheet, for free, and let's look at the controls. It can be a little bit tricky, so you might want to get the book to kind of help you out if you're serious about it. They also have some good like PDF documents that kind of explain SOC 2 reports and some of the elements. So you might want to get those because they're free as a starting point and kind of look through them and read them before you go and splurge on getting the book. It's not too expensive. I want to think it was like $50 or something like that, but it's not too bad. So yeah, again, the title is in the slide. So with that, let me see, how do I stop sharing? Nope.
Okay, that was an amazing presentation. If anybody has any questions, you can type them and see if we have any questions so far. See what we got. Oh, it's the link you posted. Yeah, thank you very much. This was a great presentation. Any other questions, guys?
If anyone that's watching on the Discord as well, if you want to type a question in on the general chat.
We're actually
I have
testing,
a question.
streaming this into Discord, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, but you have the echo because you have both streams.
Sorry. I'm gonna mute right now.
So you mentioned some of the GRC tools. There is still an echo. I've been getting a lot of ads, and my whole company has, about SOC in a day tools, which isn't gonna happen, but they are advertising as these like $10,000 tools that are basically document storage.
Yeah, that's basically
with some checklists integrated.
Yeah.
Have you seen those provide any value? Because it's
the only
somewhere
value
between.
The only value I would see in them is just helping you kind of organize the evidence gathering that you need to do. Because when I started thinking about it, because a lot of stuff I don't use tools just because we didn't have the money for tools. I would do a lot of spreadsheets and this sort of stuff. And so some of the things I was thinking like, okay, if I'm gathering all this evidence, what's the easiest way for me to kind of gather it and manage it? And all I can think of is like creating pardon my French, a shitload of directories. Because the way it is, if you look at the SOC2 controls, is that they're it's a spread, it's a listing of it. So you have 1.1, and then underneath it there is 4 or 5 possible controls. So is that 1.1.1, 1.1.2, and then it's like
right now.
And then it's 1.2 and this sort of stuff. So I do have a whole bunch of nested directories or what have you. And then as I'm getting evidence, I go like, okay, I got this evidence for this month, I'm dropping in there. Oh, I've got this money for evidence from the next month, I drop it in there. And then I go in there and I got like a year's worth of evidence either gathered either weekly or monthly, and it's all in a freaking directory, all these subdirectories. And it's like, oh my God. And how do I get it over to the assessor? And it's sort of like, so a lot of the GRC tools, that's what they're all about, is that they're helping you kind of manage these sort of things. There's like ServiceNow and Audit Board and some others, which they're ones I know of, but I just they're not just for SOC 2, they're for like all these sort of auditing and assessments and so forth that are out there that like Sarbanes-Oxley and 27001 and PCI and everything else, that just becomes, even some of these tools where you actually will put your whole policy set in them and so forth. So, it's really kind of crazy. So, it's a whole business. I mean, when you go to like an ISACA conference, and there'll be like probably 2 or 3 vendors, just on GRC tools.
Yeah.
RSA has one, IBM has one, and yada yada yada.
Yeah. I'm seeing this new class come out that they're not full-blown GRC tools, and I say that because it's not very customizable. We've got SOC and one other framework, and they're separate pieces of software that we sell as SaaS applications.
Yeah.
I get the value if you have 3 compliance things and you need that same piece of evidence to be tagged in different ways, but I just didn't know if you had seen somebody actually find value out of one that's specifically for SOC2 and not a full-blown GRC tool.
Mm-hmm. Not really. That's something I'd love to learn more about, because as I go forward and doing more and more compliance stuff with companies, I want to see like what tool would I want to use. It's even funny, even like the accounting firm that I was working with, initially for their system for even uploading and giving them evidence, it used to be basically an FTP server, which was a real pain. And they went to another system, and I'm like, I hate to say I'm blanking on the name of it, but it was like more of like an Excel spreadsheet on steroids, in that it had an Excel spreadsheet, so they had all the controls, but then there was an area for, I can just drop in the evidence that you need, and it was uploaded to them, and then I know, and then they could mark it to show like, okay, we got the evidence, everything's good, who are they going to talk to, and this sort of. So it was a great way for as a, to track the progress, what needed to be done, what was there, and so forth. And I'm blanking on the name of the product. I want to say ShareFile, but that's not correct. But it was when they went to use that with their assessment, it just made things a lot easier, especially able to just do drag and drop and so forth. With the assessments.
There was another question about free materials to do IT audits, or at least to get started. What would you recommend to get started?
I've actually kind of had to learn on my own, but I kind of look up to ISACA for IT audit type information, because I kind of view ISACA as the IT audit and control organization. Another one is IIA, the Internal Audit Association, that I'm not really involved in, but I'm involved with ISACA. So they have materials and whatnot. Some of them it's only, either you have to pay for it unless you're a member, and if you're a member, you either get it free or there are some training. And actually they've done some, I think recently done some training, some certification programs on IT audit that's fairly inexpensive. So that's something to look at. They've even done some other things that are kind of interesting. Yeah, they have one. They have one certificate called a cybersecurity audit certificate. That's something to look into. They do have training. I think even you can get like a book from them that they can just read through and get prepared for it. And they also, what's thinking with ISACA is they recently teamed up with the Cloud Security Alliance to come up with a cloud security audit knowledge certificate, which is the first. So I mean, that's something that's also kind of, that's also kind of bothered me, because as more and more of the companies I've dealt with we're moving to the cloud, I might think like, okay, how would I audit that, and understand that what they're doing is okay, and now they've got this.
Any other questions? Let's see. All right, this was an amazing presentation. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending. If you have time free today, we do have a Securing Kubernetes talk at 2 p.m. Pacific for Pacific hackers, and I'm sure it's going to be an amazing talk. If not, then I'll see you guys in Discord and keep in touch because I'm sure we will have updates for DEF CON and other conferences soon. Thank you very much, and I'll see you soon.